And so we're driving down this dirt road, starts raining like crazy, and all of a sudden we see flames coming from out from under the hood of the car. This happens just as we pull into the last village before the end of, before we really get into the jungle.
So, thank you for joining me again this morning. Where we left off, we had just finished up the very end portion, talking about your time in the Marines itself. And then would you like to just continue from there?
Sure. After I got out of the Marine Corps in 1968, I had applied to go to college. And at the time, my parents had moved to college. My dad took a job working for the Air Force. He was in fuels logistics, so he was responsible for fuels management for a lot of aircraft and that sort of thing. And his job ended up taking him out to Lackland Air Force Base. And because they had moved before I turned 18, I qualified as a resident of Texas to go to college there. And at the time, tuition at a state school in Texas for residents was $50
Wow.
a semester. So any other schools that I looked at, it was like tuition was much more expensive. So I figured that was pretty good. And I had never been to Texas before. I thought it'd be a great place to, to start anew. And so I went to the University of Houston and started out as an English major, primarily because I had been greatly influenced by an English teacher in high school who had encouraged me to become a writer because of some of the stuff I had written in high school. So I was going to become an English teacher. And then when I started taking English classes in English and literature and that sort of stuff, it really didn't appeal to me that much. I took a journalism class, and it was like magic.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like I fell into it. It was like a natural thing, the who, what, when, where, why, and how of journalism. It was just, I was like, this is my niche in life, and this is what I was going to do. So I started writing freelance articles, and I started writing for the school newspaper and that sort of thing. And then after about 2 years of living in Houston and driving a truck part-time for a restaurant supply company, I decided I was going to be a beach bum. And so I was married at the time, no kids, but we decided to move to Florida. I'd never been to Florida before, and so we picked a spot on the map somewhere on the East Coast, and it's like West Palm Beach was too far south, too close to Miami, Jacksonville, too far north. So there's this little town that I picked out called Fort Pierce, which is about halfway between West Palm Beach and Jacksonville. And I knew nothing about it, knew nobody there. So we packed up a U-Haul truck and wife and 2 cats and headed to Florida. And knew nobody there, no job prospects, nothing. And pulled in, went to a motel there and got the local newspaper and started looking for jobs. And there was a job driving a truck for, I think it was Coke. It was either Coke or Pepsi. I don't remember which.
Might make some people mad, but not no.
Yeah, which I was going to apply for. But the local newspaper was right down the street. And I said, well, I think I'll go down there and put in an application. So I went down there, and the boss, the editor at the time, the good guy, his name was Bob Enns, and he gave me a test. He sat me down in a room. It was a junk room, actually. It had a desk with a typewriter and a lot of used furniture just piled up all over the place. Manual typewriter and all this. And he just
somewhere down in the basement.
No, it wasn't the basement. No, because there were very few basements in that part of Florida at that time. So he hands me a list of random facts, just stuff all over the place. He says, write a news story out of this. And so I did what I had practiced doing in college, and I wrote a news story. And he told me later, he said it was the best anybody had ever done on that. And he basically hired me on the spot because they had just had somebody leave $75 a week to write obituaries and the local cop news. And essentially, that's how I got my start, taking obituaries over the telephone, writing them up, and then calling the cops and the sheriff's department, got any news, anything happen, anybody shoot anybody, that sort of thing. And so that's basically how I got into the newspaper business. I mean, I picked that over the truck driving job because in the newspaper business, there's no heavy lifting. And so I was like...
You were done with that.
Yeah, I was done with that sort of thing. And so here I am. Fort Pierce was an interesting little community because it was right on the coast. And it was a strange combination of economies that went into it. There was a big cattle industry. There were a lot of cattle ranches around the area at the time. There were also citrus groves, oranges, grapefruit, and that sort of thing. And then there was the fishing industry. So it wasn't a tourist town where you had people coming to go to the beach. You had people to come there to fish, but there was a lot of agriculture in that area there. So it wasn't a typical beach community. So it made for a lot of interesting dynamics in that particular little town, and it was a small town. And it was interesting because everybody there had their hand in something or another. For example, like the mayor of the town ran the local funeral home also.
Yeah.
And his brother was involved in stuff, and so it was just a lot of interesting dynamics, a lot of political, a lot of strange politics going on there between the cattlemen and the citrus people, and then the people wanting to be more of a tourist town and that sort of thing. So it was an interesting little town.
So you said that in college, one thing with that, did you find that it was, when you started writing in college, was it more of like the creative nonfiction? You were just disinterested in that, and the real journalism was just the more interesting part to you?
Well, the real journalism was more interesting to me because I was able to cover things and write very quickly. I covered some things for the local student newspaper, started writing some sports articles for them. But I was also still kind of dabbling in creative fiction, would write fiction pieces that a couple published in various magazines, surfer magazines, as a matter of fact. And so I was doing that and was writing some poetry, some really bad poetry, and wasn't quite sure what direction I was going to go, but the straight journalism kind of thing, the straight news reporting, very much appealed to me because it was very immediate. And I discovered I was good at it. I could do it. I don't want to say I didn't have to think about it, but it was something that just seemed to come naturally to me.
Well, I mean, that's nice that you were able to find that, because I know it's been difficult for me. I know it's difficult for a lot of people, because I found things that I was good at but didn't like, so I didn't want to continue to do them. Do you feel that once you got down to Fort Pierce and you started writing, you went into obituaries? I'm sure your experience in the Marines, having done what you did there, kind of informed a little bit what you were doing with that.
That was just one of many jobs that I had because the staff was so small. I was expected to do a number of different things. So in addition to doing the obituaries, I did sports. I covered local high school sports, covered county commission meetings, city commission meetings. It's like you had to be kind of a jack of all trades when you work for a small paper like that. But the thing that really struck me and brought me back to my time in the Marine Corps and dealing with the casualties was not long after I started there, we had a story that broke that made national news, and it involved a local kid, a black kid who'd been killed in Vietnam. And there was a local cemetery that was offering free burial plots to veterans and to anybody who had died in Vietnam. And so this kid's mother went to this cemetery and wanted to see about having her son buried there because she did not have a lot of money.
Yeah.
And the cemetery, and we're talking 1970 here, so we're talking still, it's kind of a racially divided town, still segregated to a certain degree. This particular cemetery had in its, trying to think of the word for it now, it's just not coming to mind, but it had written in its bylaws that nobody except white people could be buried in that cemetery. And so this guy's mother came to the paper, and she talked initially to a guy, one of our part-timers, who was there, and he wrote a story about how the owners of this cemetery would not let this kid be buried there. So the story ended up being shifted to me, and it became. And so I ended up writing about the story, and I remember in particular one incident where when his body came back and they put it in the funeral home, and I went to interview his mother, and his mother was in the room there, and the casket was there, flag draped casket and that sort of thing. And that was one of the more difficult interviews that I have ever done, because talking to this kid's mother, and she's gone through this whole thing. The case went to court. And we had veterans groups coming out in support of her. You had white and black veterans coming out in support of her. And so eventually the court ruled that she had to, that the cemetery had to offer her a plot, because they had advertised in the newspaper that free burial plots to
didn't
deceased
specify
veterans.
anything.
No, it didn't say anything. And anyway, you couldn't discriminate against it. And I was always thinking, what the hell does it matter?
Well, I was trying to think of the dates, if this was like pre-civil rights movement or
it was actually post-civil rights
Okay.
movement. It was 1970.
Okay.
But this was still a very segregated town. And
Yeah.
they were very slow to come into the
a lot of people don't
20th
think
century.
about those things happen in the cities, and then it takes time to move its way out to the rural areas. Not arguing whether that's right or anything, and I'm terrible with dates, so I don't remember when anything happened. So that was going through my head of when, if this was pre or post civil rights movements, and then with the shifting of laws, and it was probably something that was necessary at the time to have those people realize, like, hey, things are changing, and you have to start to adapt with the times.
Yeah, and in this particular community, I mean, it was still living to a certain degree in the pre-civil rights era, because we're talking, Martin Luther King was assassinated in 1968. You had the riots after that, and then RFK Jr. was assassinated in 68. So we're talking 2 years after that, when, for the most part, most people had tried to move on and come into the 20th century, but this particular cemetery still had written in its covenants that no black people could be buried in this cemetery. And like I said, I always thought, what the hell does it matter?
Yeah.
I mean, it's everybody's. Why are you segregating it? It made absolutely no sense to me whatsoever.
Well, especially having been where you've been and being a part of the Marines, which I'm sure things weren't perfect at the time, but the military, I'm sure you get much more of a mixed bag of people from all over the country. So you, in your experience, probably had met more people who have had that outside of their own small town experience. Because I'm sure even the news down there at the time was, like, I'm sure they heard of those things that have happened, civil rights movement, Kennedy assassination, but that was that over there. That's still far removed from our little town way over here.
Yeah, and like I said, Fort Pierce at that time was still a very segregated community. You had Lincoln Park, which was the black area, and then you had the white area. But it was around that time also that they decided to integrate the schools. And that was another issue. All these things were happening at the same time, where you had the black high school, and I can't remember the name of it now, and the white high school, Dan McCarty High School. They were integrated, and we had riots at the school, and I was in the middle of some of those, trying to report on some of those riots.
Yeah.
And so it was a very turbulent era in that particular town's history. We had all these factors coming together, and trying to get the white residents of Fort Pierce to fully realize that, you know, we're living in a different era now, and black and white have to learn to live together. And you know, you had mentioned my experience in the Marine Corps. I grew up in a town where there were no black people, and so my experience with black people had to deal with mostly through high school sports initially. And then when I got in the Marine Corps, I mean, about half our platoon in boot camp was black. And we had one guy who I'd mentioned in a previous episode, Quinton Chandler, who got killed in Vietnam, and I handled his paperwork and that sort of thing. I mean, he was a great guy. I just loved that guy because he was just full of energy and funny guy, and it just really came to, you know, like being around him because he kept everybody in the platoon loose, and just a great guy. So getting to Fort Pierce in this segregated community after having been in the Marine Corps and, you know, dealt with people of all races, it was like going back to another era. And then you had these struggles, first with the funeral of Specialist Williams, and then you had the school integration, and it was a very turbulent time.
I'm sure it was a whole new level, or a whole different kind of culture shock, coming from primarily segregated white to integrated Marines, back to primarily segregated white. And
yeah, it was. I mean, for me, it wasn't that difficult. It was very difficult for people in that little community to come to grips with all of that. And the strange thing is that what brought the community together after the integration of the schools was the high school football team.
Yeah.
They went on, I can't remember if it was that year or the year after, but they went to the state playoffs one year, and then the next year they won the state championship. And it's kind of like, you know, the whole town was in support of this integrated football team where you had black players and white players together, white head coach, you had black assistant coaches, and it just kind of seemed to resolve a lot of the issues that had been very prominent in the city before that.
Yeah, it reminds me of the Remember the Titans, the movie.
Exactly.
Pretty similar.
Yeah, it was very similar to that sort of thing. Yeah,
and it's one of those where it's you know, people may think about, you know, why does it take something as silly as football to make something like that happen? But you know, you argue about the finding common ground. You know, like it's not silly that it was football. It was just finding that thing that people can relate to and realize, you know, hey, we're not all that different. And if football is that thing that does it, then great. You know, whatever the catalyst may be, you know, to make that happen, it's good that started to happen there.
Yeah. So I spent 2 years there, and I think the most I made was $125 a week. And I was doing all sorts of stories. I mean, I was doing sports, I was doing news, just all sorts of things, and getting great experience about talking to different people, different backgrounds and that. So it was a great learning experience. And then there was an editor, sports editor at a paper that was just starting in Cocoa, Florida. It was actually the prototype for what became USA Today.
Really?
And it was called, it's now Florida Today, but back at the time it was Cocoa Today, they called it. And the sports editor there had seen some of the stuff that I had written when I was working in Fort Pierce, some of the sports stories. And he called me up and said, "You want to come up for an interview? I can offer you $150 a week to start." He said, "I really like your stuff." And so I went up and I interviewed with him, and he offered me the job. And I thought, well, yeah, again, here's a job with no heavy lifting, and I wrote about sports. And so I spent 2 years there at Cocoa Today, and then that editor moved to the St. Petersburg Times, and he asked me to come with him and to cover sports there. So I continued writing about sports, ended up covering a lot of pro football. I covered the Tampa Bay Buccaneers in their first 3 years. First 2 years they went 0-26, which was a lot of fun. And John McKay was the head coach, and so. But again, it was one of those things where I was learning to write on deadline, trying to get a lot of facts together, and putting them into a story. And this was in an era in the newspaper business too, where we were just going from manual typewriters and actual paper that you wrote on to computers. So there was a constant shifting from the old style journalism and the old style typewriters to working with computers. So there was very much a learning experience there.
Yeah.
But after about 7 years of doing sports, I got tired of that, and I wanted to do something else. I wanted to expand, and I wanted to. They were not at the St. Pete Times. It's like, well, you do sports. We don't know if you can do real news. And so they sent me out to a bureau to do real news. And so I was there for about a year just doing just straight news in the Clearwater Bureau.
And what is a bureau exactly?
It's an extension of the main office.
Okay.
So, for example, we had bureaus in Clearwater, and we wrote specifically about news about the Clearwater, Dunedin area, communities out there.
Gotcha.
Then we had a bureau, I think, in Pasco County, Florida, and we had one, I think, down in Bradenton, Florida, and they wrote specifically about that. And they had what they called zoned editions too, where you would have I don't know, 3 or 4 pages of news specifically about those regions, and the bureaus, people who worked in those bureaus would write specifically for that.
Gotcha. So sort of like subsidiaries of the kind of like how you have Fox News as a whole, but then our local is Fox News 13, like in the area.
To a great extent, it's very much
kind of
like,
similar to that.
Very much like that.
Okay.
And this was still in an era. This is pre-internet era, so people got their news either through television or actual newspapers. It was. It was a good time to be in the business. Even though we were getting into more of the computer era of it. But, I enjoyed doing that, but I wanted to do something different again. So I spent 7 years at the St. Pete Times, and then the boss who had hired me at St. Pete, he went to Atlanta. And so he said, "Do you want to come to Atlanta?"
Again, yeah.
And so I followed him to Atlanta, and again, it was covering sports initially, and I told him I'm going to come there, but I don't want to cover sports my whole life. I want to do something else. And so in 1981, I moved to Atlanta, covered the Atlanta Falcons for a couple of years, and then went into straight news.
Okay. So did you feel, you've mentioned a couple of times about the deadlines and things like that. Did you feel part of being in the news was that working under pressure and having to make those, what made it exciting or you excelled at? kind of thing? Why you like doing that?
Yeah, I found what I could do was I could get out and I could do a story and I could gather facts and put it into a story, a readable story, in a short period of time. I remember there were some stories that I covered after I got to Atlanta and got back into straight news. There was a prison riot in Alabama one time, and they sent me over there for that. And I remember, and again, this was in an era before cell phones, and so there was some breaking news. There was a press conference or something like that at this prison, kind of in the middle of the night. And it's like, okay, where's the nearest telephone?
Yeah.
And there were several houses like a half mile or quarter mile away, and so it's like, okay, who's the fastest guy? It's going to get to the telephone, and so I'm the first guy to the nearest telephone, and was able to convince people in the house, let me use your telephone. So I had scribbled notes on my notepad, and I'm calling in stuff, and it's not a complete story, but it's enough information that the people back on the rewrite desk or the copy desk can put this information together. So I mean, I kind of like that because it was exciting. It was like, who can be the first to get this kind of thing and get it correct? And it was very enervating, and I really enjoyed that kind of the competition and the being able to put information together in a something that people would want to read.
Well, you make a very important statement, I think, just now when you said get it correct. In that in today's news world, it seems that there's still that rush to get it out first, but it's whoever can get that tweet out first from their phone. And it doesn't matter really what's in it, as long as you were the first one to put it out there because you were first on scene and hit send. And you know, the correctness part, not that I don't believe there are ones out there that desire to be correct, but it seems like that's kind of faded a little bit with the focus more on the immediacy part.
I would not do well in today's environment in the newspaper business because to me, getting things accurate was more important than getting it out there. So I see stuff now that people. One of the problems with the newspaper business now, which I really have a problem with, and not only newspaper business, but I mean I see it online a whole lot. It's that you don't have people doing real reporting anymore. You have people, to me, it's like they're reporting on what amounts to letters to the editor, where you have reporters writing about what people say about events. You don't write about the events, you're writing about what people say. You're writing about their tweets. You're writing about what they put in Facebook, or whatever the case may be. And to me, that's not real reporting. That's you're taking stuff that other people say and you're reporting about that, but it's not. I mean, to me, that's not news. You're just passing along gossip.
It seems like they're skipping a step in that they would take all that in, like you say, to the editor, and then you would take that info and put it together and vet it a bit to then put out a whole product. Now it's just, it doesn't matter about that part anymore. Yeah. That part can come afterward, after all the outrage, and then they issue the correction when no one cares anymore.
Well, so much of what I see is so-and-so slams so-and-so for this, or so-and-so claps back at this. I mean, that's not journalism. I mean, that's just your base. And to me, it's like I just mentioned, it's like reporting on letters to the editor.
Yeah.
You know, you're writing about what somebody else says about something. You're not writing about the event itself.
No, it's definitely wild out there right now. So where did you go from there?
Well, I stayed at the Atlanta Journal-Constitution for 26 years.
Wow, okay.
After my 2 years or so in doing sports, my boss at the time, I told him, I said I wanted, actually was the managing editor, a guy by the name of Jim Minter, who had been with the paper for a long time. And I told him, I said, I want to get out of sports. I want to do something else. And he says, well, I'll see if you can do straight news. So he gave me an assignment. He said, let's see how you do with this. And the assignment was to report on the 20th anniversary of JFK's assassination.
Gotcha.
So this was my test run to get into straight news. And so he gave me free rein. He said, go wherever you want to go, do whatever you want to do, and then we'll see how you do in this story. And that was one of the more fascinating stories that I have done in my 40-year newspaper career.
Yeah.
Because I went to Dallas, and one of the people I talked to was J.R. Lavelle, who was one of the deputies who was holding on to Oswald when Jack Ruby shot him. If you remember the picture of the moment that Jack Ruby shoots Oswald, there's a cop on Oswald's right arm wearing a Stetson, and he's pulling back like that. That's J.R. Lavelle. I tracked him down and talked to him about the assassination and what happened that day, and his theories on, what was this? Did Oswald really do it?
Mm-hmm.
Or, and all of that.
The grassy knoll versus
the grassy knoll and all that kind of stuff. An interesting note about JR, which I didn't know until later. I didn't know until 2006, I think it was. J.R. Lavelle was at Pearl Harbor the day it was bombed also.
Wow.
So here you had a man who had been at two of the most iconic events in the 20th century. He had been at Pearl Harbor, he survived that, and then he had been part of the aftermath of the Kennedy assassination. And so I found that fascinating. And as a matter of fact, I went to the, I guess this was the 65th and probably last anniversary of the Pearl Harbor Survivors Association in Hawaii. It's my last big assignment for the paper. And I ran into him there. He didn't remember me because he had talked to so many people about that. But I told him, I said, this is absolutely fascinating. You were at the two of the most significant events of the 20th century, and survived both of them. And so I just thought that was kind of interesting, a very serendipitous sort of thing that I had an opportunity to talk to this guy on two different occasions about those two events.
Yeah, that's wild. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure he was probably just a normal dude who didn't think anything of, my life being part of the two biggest things in our recent history.
Yeah, I mean, he was just normal guy, just very polite, pleasant. I mean, he was a cop, but he was just very, very easy to get along with, very, very talkative. And, I spent a great deal of time with him when I was doing the story on the 20th anniversary of the Kennedy assassination. But that was interesting. I mean, and not only did I talk to him, but I went to this Texas School Book Depository because I wanted to see, what Oswald saw from that, I think it was the 6th floor or whichever floor it was. And at that time, the building was still being used as a warehouse. And I was able to talk my way into it, and I got up to the window where Oswald actually took the shot, and I was able to look down and see. And it convinced me that Oswald, when you look at the videos and you look at the photos from that, you don't really get the same perspective as when you're standing right there. But it was an easy shot for anybody who has had any kind of military training, especially Marine Corps training, as Oswald had.
Yeah.
And it's that convinced me. There's no way that anybody else could have been. Oswald had been very easy to make that shot. So anyway, I was able to do that. I was able to talk to the pilot of Air Force One who flew JFK's body back. I went to Boston and talked to Dave Powers, who had been Kennedy's press secretary, went through the various documents that they had up there about the assassination. Talked to, very briefly, Oswald's widow on the telephone. So it was a fascinating assignment because I could go anywhere, do anything I wanted to do. And so I ended up doing a story that I don't know. It was a very lengthy story. It took up part of the front page and then almost two full inside pages. Anyway, that was my trial run to become a straight news reporter for the AJC, and Jim Minner was very pleased with it, and so it just went on from then on. It was straight news.
Yeah. And how long did you said you were there 26 years. How long were you there before you reached that point? You said a couple of years, right?
Yeah, I worked in sports for about 2 years there.
Gotcha.
So it was 83, roughly, when I first started going into straight news.
So essentially 24 years after that was a whole different direction in the news for you.
Exactly, yeah. Initially, after doing that story on JFK and the assassination, I went into doing regional news where I was covering the South, the Southeast, and I was kind of a roving reporter covering any breaking news in the Southeast. I would go. I mean, covered all sorts of things. And that's kind of how I got back into, or not got back into, but I started doing more military affairs stuff. I did a piece on unresolved cases of guys who had been missing in action from Vietnam. Did stuff on, there were a couple of Army National Guard guys from Alabama that got shot down. They had gone down to Nicaragua, or actually had gone to Honduras, and were aiding the Contras down there. And so I did a story on that, and that ended up taking me on a roughly 6-week expedition down to Central America in the early 1980s.
Wow.
So went to Nicaragua, El Salvador, Honduras, covering the U.S. involvement down there. And so that kind of drew me back into doing much more military affairs stuff.
Is that something that just kind of came across your desk as the next assignment, or is that something you were trying to move yourself into?
Well, it really wasn't an assignment. I mean, a lot of these things were things that either I had picked up or my editor had picked up, and it's like we would discuss: is this something that we want to do, or is this something that you think should we pass on this, give this to somebody else, kind of thing. But when those two guys from Alabama got shot down in Nicaragua, or actually they were in Nicaragua and got killed. It was like, well, I was covering a lot of stuff in Alabama at the time. And so I was able to go over there, talk to people, and because of my background in the military, I knew the language, could talk to them, and it sort of gradually fell into me doing more in terms of military affairs and that sort of thing.
Gotcha. So where did you move on from there?
Well, I just continued doing assignments for the national desk, working out of the national desk, and some of it depended on what editors wanted me to do, but the assignment to going down to Central America, we did a big special section on that and did a number of stories on that. While I was down there, I mean, I did a number of different things. Went to various places in Nicaragua. Covered things like refugee camps in El Salvador. Went out with the Salvadoran military on patrol, looking for guerrillas. was one incident where wanted to get the guerrillas side of the story too.
Yeah.
And so talked to one of the cab drivers at the hotel where we were staying, and he said, "Well, for X number of dollars, I don't remember how much, I might be able to do something for you." So he had said, meet me tomorrow morning, such and such a time, and I'll see what I can do. And so myself and the photographer met him the next morning. He drove us out into the country, out into the middle of nowhere, and lets us out of the car, and had the FMLN, the guerrillas, sort of come out of the woodwork. And
Wow.
started, just talking to them. Some of them spoke English. I didn't speak much Spanish, but the cab driver helped with some of the interpreting. I just remember at one point, they're all standing around, talking to us, photographers taking pictures, and we hear a helicopter. And I look for the helicopter, and when I could look back down, they're all gone. They had all just, they were not sure. But anyway, so I spent probably about an hour with them, talking to them. And it was just one of those things where it's with enough ingenuity and enough, putting money in the right places, you can probably get out to see enough people, do the sort of things that sometimes you shouldn't probably do. But it was a matter of, I always tried to balance the sort of risks against reward sort of thing. How risky is this going to be, and is it going to be rewarding enough to take this risk? So, and later on in my career, as I'm doing other things, the risk reward sort of thing really played into, well, no, I'm not going to go here because there's too much risk, but I'll do this because I'm gauging that there is not too much risk here.
Well, I'm sure it took a couple of a pair of brass ones to pay some random cab driver to drive you out to the middle of nowhere. And I'm sure that was kind of nerve-wracking, like, are we even going to come back from this?
Well, there were other incidents later on in my career where I thought that might happen. This one, I really was not that concerned because
Really?
And I'm not sure exactly why, but that was an interesting trip down there, not only because of the fact that, there were just certain things that happened. There was one where a colleague of mine, a guy who was with me, who spoke really good Spanish, we rented a car, actually it was a Jeep Cherokee, and we were going to go into southern part of Nicaragua in order to see if we had heard a rumor that some American soldiers had been down there in that area and had been killed or wounded or something like that. And so it's like we get in the car and we're driving down, and we stop for gas at some point out in the middle of nowhere. And we're driving along, and all of a sudden the car starts to, the engine starts to sputter.
Really?
And it's like, okay, what's going on? And ended up, we got some bad gasoline. So it's like, okay, let's just keep going and see how far we can go. And so we're driving down this dirt road, starts raining like crazy, and all of a sudden we see flames coming from out from under the hood of the car. And this happens just as we pull into the last village before the end of, before we really get into the jungle. And this is, again, one of these very serendipitous things that the engine's on fire and the car stops, and it just so happens that we stop right next to the only mechanic in town. It was very bizarre, and so we were able to push the car into this guy's garage, which is just a ramshackle, little hut there, and he rewires the whole car. Not the whole car, but the engine, so that we're able to start the engine and we get some clean gas. And I can't remember, we paid him like $100 US
Yeah.
to do this. I mean, a job that would cost several $1,000s probably. And we're able to get the car started again. And it turns out that the rumors we heard were totally false. And so we're way down in the middle of nowhere here with a car with an engine that's almost burned up.
With no story.
With no story, yeah. So on the way back, as we're going back to Managua, we run into a roadblock with there are a couple of soldiers actually that wave us down, a couple of Sandinista soldiers. It's like there had been a car that had gone through there that had not stopped for the roadblock, and they are commandeering our car to chase this car down.
Wow.
And so we're driving, we got these guys and we're trying to limp along in this car that won't go very fast. They finally get frustrated and say, it's like, okay, just let us out kind of thing. So we let them out and, we're able to limp back to Managua.
That's crazy.
Yeah. It was a really unusual trip. But one of the other interesting stories about this, the guy who had been with me on this particular one. One day we went to I think it's the Sheraton there in El Salvador, in San Salvador, El Salvador, and we were having breakfast or something like that. And this group of really attractive women come in and they sit down at a table very near us. And so the guy that I'm with, who speaks very good Spanish, he's enamored of this one woman, and he says, I'm going to go talk to her. So he doesn't go talk to her. He goes over and he gets down on one knee and he starts singing in Spanish to her.
Now you're in a movie.
Yeah, and it's like, Gary, what in the world are you doing here? You don't know who she is or anything like that. So, it's like Gary was a very, very strange guy anyway. So a couple of nights later, we're invited to a party at the president's palace, Duarte. And we go to the president's party, and it just so happens that the woman that Gary was singing to is Duarte's wife.
What?
And so it's like, I'm not going to get in trouble. We're thinking something's going to happen to Gary, but Gary...
somebody told him about it, and he's not going to like that you were serenading his wife.
So after this party, we're getting ready, myself and a photographer who was there with me, and Gary, the photographer and I, was okay, we're getting ready to leave, go back home, and the assignment's pretty much, and Gary's like, no, I'm going off into eastern El Salvador. There's something going on over there. He goes over there and gets arrested. They throw him in jail, keep him in jail, and the paper has to intervene, get lawyers down there to get him out of jail and all that kind of stuff. And then he comes back and he contributes to this special section that we do. And then we never see him again. He leaves, never see him again. But it was that whole scene in the restaurant there with him getting down on one knee and singing in Spanish in this, bass baritone voice. It was just one of those bizarre things that, you can't make up.
Yeah. It makes me maybe think about, you talk about him getting arrested and such. How did the Salvadoran military feel about you wanting to go talk to the guerrillas? Were they cool?
I didn't tell them.
You didn't tell them? Yeah.
No.
Yeah. They probably wouldn't have liked it very much, huh?
No, you don't. No, it was a very clandestine sort of thing. You don't tell them because you don't want to get in trouble. You don't want them following you,
finding
and creating
them,
a problem.
Now you've made a national incident.
Yeah. So, later on, there's another incident that I'm involved in another part of the world where the police are involved, the military is involved, but anyway, we could get to that a little later.
Well, I was just thinking, at what point did you start getting? Because eventually you started going to like Iraq, Afghanistan, and stuff. How far removed were these two events? I mean, I assume that's like several years in between.
Yeah, the stuff that I did in Central America was 1983, and then it was Operation Desert Shield, Desert Storm was 91.
Mm-hmm.
So it was several years removed from that, but there were other things in between that had somewhat of a military component to it. But I mean, like in 80, I want to say 86, 87, somewhere around in that time frame, I spent over a year doing a series of stories on Native Americans, where I traveled all over the country doing stories on various aspects of Native American life, which that was an interesting thing. I mean, really interesting series, and got to travel quite a bit and talk to a lot of different people, but that there was not a whole lot of military component to that. So it was later on. I mean, it was it was 91 when I got back into doing military affairs.
Gotcha. So still very interesting and important things. Maybe not. How do I want to say this? Quite so not climactic, but just not quite so crazy as finding gorillas in the jungle and such.
Yeah.
So when you did Desert Storm, Desert Shield, that was your first time going overseas for like any like the American involvement with a war kind of thing like that, I assume.
To a certain extent, yeah. But prior to that, I had done a series of stories on the international drug trade and sort of the nexus of drugs for guns and how drugs fuel various wars around the world and that sort of thing. And so that kind of got me back into writing things about not so much about the U.S. military, but about foreign military and how they dealt with that particular issue. And that was an assignment that took me to, I don't know how many different countries, but I went to, did a lot in the Far East. Went to Thailand, went to Burma, went to Afghanistan while the Soviets, right after they had announced they were pulling out. Did a lot in Central America during that time. And so there was always some sort of military involvement there in some capacity or another. But in terms of Desert Shield, Desert Storm thing, was kind of an interesting way how I got involved in it, because we had a change of management at the newspaper at that time. And so I had gotten sort of pushed aside by the new management, because I was part of the old team that had been there for some time. And so I was doing editing. I wasn't really reporting at the time. They had put me in an editing role. And when Desert Shield, Desert Storm, or when Desert Shield started up, the people in the Washington Bureau of Cox Newspapers, which owned the Journal-Constitution, they knew of my military background, and they sort of volunteered me to go over there and replace a guy who had been there who wanted to come home, because he went over there when first troops went over. I think it was I can't remember, August, September of 1990 or something like that. And so I went over there in December of 1990 with the idea that I would try to get with a unit that had come out of Fort Stewart. At the time, it was the 24th Infantry Division.
Okay.
And so The other guy who was over there, Joe Albright, was going to do more of an overview kind of thing. So I went over there, and at the time, it was interesting that they were they were in the process of working on this pool system of getting reporters out with various units and that sort of thing. And I ended up where they would send reporters out in groups a lot of times to various units that were training in the desert, and they would send back reports. And one of the initial jobs that I had over there was to filter through these reports and see, who was doing what and that sort of thing. So I spent a lot of time in the hotel in Dhahran, Saudi Arabia there, kind of waiting for the war to start kind of thing, because they spent a lot of time training in the desert. I did get to go out with various units and just see them in the training exercises and that sort of thing. Then I can't remember exactly the sequence of events of how, but at one point I had gotten out with the 24th Infantry Division, spent some time with them, and got to know the commanding general of the unit, and he wanted hometown news coverage. He was not a big fan of the pool system because he didn't know the reporters. And so he wanted the Atlanta Journal-Constitution to be with his unit when they went into combat.
Okay.
And so I was that reporter. So I kind of broke out of the pool system that they had arranged and ended up with the 24th Infantry Division. The commanding general of the division at that time was Barry McCaffrey, who was 2-star at the time. Later goes on to be 4-star, and he's a national, or at one point was a national drug policy advisor to, I guess it was Clinton. Can't remember exactly which, but McCaffrey and I got along really well. He liked the fact that I was prior military. He was aware of that fact, knew that I could handle myself, and so basically I was an embed before there were embeds.
Yeah, kind of pioneered the idea.
Yeah, it really made a lot of the other reporters mad.
Were they jealous, or?
Yeah, it's sort of like I broke the system.
Yeah,
and it's kind of like. So how did he get to be so privileged and that sort of thing? So, but I had a good experience with them. The war was so short. It was like, one of the things I remember in particular about it was the number of prisoners that we took. When I say we, I was just, the unit took so many prisoners, they didn't know what to do with them. And basically, they got to the point where they would disarm them and just point them in direction, go that way. Give them some water, give them something to eat, and just go and don't fight anymore, kind of thing. There were so many of them. It's funny, as one of the officers, we were talking about the number of prisoners. He says, it's kind of like hangers in your closet. You look in there, and initially there's 1 or 2, and then the next time you look, there's like 100 hangers in there. It's like that with the prisoners. It's just, you had guys just walking out of the desert with their hands up.
Wow.
In terms of actual combat, I was with a unit that was in contact, but it's like things happened so fast, and it was over so quickly. It was basically a 100-hour war, and
I always remember the people talking about, like, we trained and prepared for months to go over there, and it lasts for 18 days or something like that.
Yeah.
It was crazy.
Yeah, and I never felt really like I was being shot at or anything like that. There were a couple of occasions where I was with the first sergeant in his Humvee, and he had his driver, and I was in the back seat. And there were a couple of occasions where there were warnings that the artillery would come and jump out and jump in a hole somewhere or something like that. But in terms of close combat, it wasn't anything like I would experience
Later on.
So it was like, just I don't have a lot of really memories of Desert Storm, Desert Shield, except for the fact that it was over so fast that it was like, okay, that's it, let's go home kind of thing.
Yeah. I've spoken to other people that were in at the same time as me, and they talk about that, how they all gear up and get ready to go, and then so many of them, their deployments got canceled because it ended up nothing really happening. So between that, then you have 10 years or so between that and the next war, or the next, September 11th, next being. So was there much excitement in the 90s and those 10 years in between?
Actually, there was quite a bit of excitement because of my background, not only in the military, but I had gotten into national security and international security issues and that sort of thing. So I guess it was 94, 95, as Atlanta was, at some point after they had gotten the rights to the Olympics, the 96 Olympics Games, I was responsible for covering the security aspects of the games, bringing in military, bringing in other police, and so it wasn't just a strict military thing. It was more of a overall security for the Olympic Games.
But more stuff kind of in your wheelhouse.
Yeah, and it had to do with law enforcement and just generally overall security of what's going on, because there was going to be a great deal of military involvement in this. So it's like, they knew that I knew people and had sources that could speak knowledgeably about this sort of thing. And they, at this time, we're also having, the threats of terrorism and that's part of my wheelhouse and things that I'm responsible for.
Yeah.
And so it's I'm gearing up for this sort of thing in 95 and then into 96.
Yeah.
So during the Olympics, there is not a whole lot for me to do. Actually, I mean, I'm monitoring things, seeing how things are going. We get to the point where we're, I think, about a week into the games, and things are going very smoothly in terms of security. And so I decide one day, well, I'm going to get tickets for my family to come down and see some of the games in the stadium. I can't remember exactly what events were going on then. So I'm at home on a Friday night, and I'm sleeping, and I get a phone call, and it's like a bomb's gone off in Centennial Olympic Park.
Yeah.
You need to get to the office right now. And so I end up getting to the office. I mean, my wife has to drive me down to catch Marta, or actually, I think she drives me all the way downtown, middle of the night, and I work. I think it's about a 20-hour shift at that point.
Yeah.
Trying to piece together what happened, who's responsible, because most of the indications we'd had to that point, if there's some terrorism at the games, it would be a foreign terrorist, because not too long before that, an aircraft, I can't remember if it was a Pan Am aircraft or something, had gone down in the Atlantic. There had been an explosion of some sort. They thought it was terrorism. I think it ended up being something else.
Yeah.
But there was always this fear that there's going to be some sort of international incident, that there's going to be terrorism of some sort, and it's going to be foreign terrorism. So my job, again, was to contact all of these sources that I had developed to try to figure out who's responsible for this. Was it a foreign terrorist? Was it domestic? Because we had gotten no indication that there would be any sort of domestic terrorism at the time. And so, I'm working throughout the night, throughout the day, trying to get some information. And there's really nobody has any good idea about what happened, who might be responsible. I mean, we had an idea about what happened because there was a lot of video of the bomb going off, people being hurt, and that sort of thing. But I had no idea. So as we're, the next day, my family comes downtown, and I'm on the phone. I finally have a cell phone. It's one of these old flip phones, these Motorola flip phones. It's like the size of a
walk around with a brick.
Yeah. And so I'm making calls, getting calls, and got the family there, and they're out in the stands, and I'm up in the press box making phone calls and things like that. So and then this was on I can't remember, it was on a Sunday, I think. I think the bombing was a Friday night. I worked through Saturday. Sunday we're there. And then Monday I come into the office, and one of the people that I'm working with on the security issue is a reporter by the name of Kathy Scruggs. And Kathy comes into the office. I can remember her walking down between desks, and she goes, "I know who they think did the bombing." And it's like, okay. So she and I get together with an editor, and it's like, she says, the FBI think the security guard who was at the games, this guy, Richard Jewell, did the bombing. And so, okay, do we have enough to go with the story? And it's like, no. And so Kathy, I'm trying to think of the best way to describe her, but she was kind of like larger than life. You knew Kathy was there. She had, she was very flamboyant. She was attractive. She was loud. She wore short skirts, low-cut blouses. She was sort of like I don't even know how to describe it. But
she walks in, her personality kind of fills the room.
It took over the room.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so she's like larger than life, and we're sort of like, I'm the complete opposite. I'm the quiet guy, family man, 3 kids, and Kathy's like this flamboyant person, and they're teaming us together. It's like I'm the sort of the buffer between Kathy and the editor and that sort of thing. And so whatever Kathy comes up with, I'm supposed to either confirm or refute or whatever through my sources, because I'm the believable one. She's kind of the wild child kind of thing. So it's like, okay, we need to find out who this guy Richard Jewell is. We need to get more information about him, find out if they think he really did it, could he have done it, how could he have done it, sort of thing. So, do we have enough information to go with the story in the next day? No, we don't. So it's like, do more reporting. And so we start sending reporters out to various places. We sent somebody to the place where Richard had last worked. His former boss is not too complimentary of him. So we get enough information to actually sit down and write a story. And Kathy and I sit there and put the story together. And it goes through various editing processes. And then they say to me, call your source at the FBI, read the story to him. And if he says, don't run that story, we won't run the story. We'll do more reporting. And so the story basically says, the FBI believes that security guard. Now, one of the problems that we have, and this is very much inside baseball kind of thing, is we did not attribute it to any sources. We said the FBI essentially believes that this guy planted the bomb. We did not say, according to law enforcement sources. We just state it as fact that this is what the FBI believes. And I had argued against that. I said, I think we should attribute this to somebody or another. because that sort of relieves us of just stating it.
They were
as
wrong,
fact.
not you were wrong
Right, right.
Yeah.
But they decide to go without the attribution, which raises a lot of headaches later. So anyway, they say, okay, so I call my source, and he says, well, I can't attest to certain things, but the basis of the story is correct. The FBI believes that the security guard was responsible for the bomb. So we put out a special edition of the story, rush it over to CNN. CNN reads it on the air, that kind of thing. And we end up, over the next few days, doing more reporting. And as we do more reporting, the blame, even though the FBI still thinks he was responsible, we're starting to look away from it. And we're writing stories to that effect. So that takes up well over a year of, from the beginning of the writing about security of the Olympics to going through the whole thing with Richard Jewell and the lawsuit and being sued and being threatened with jail. I'm held in contempt. Kathy and I are held in contempt of court. We're ordered to go to jail. The lawyer's got to rush down to the courthouse and file an appeal, keeps us out of jail. And somebody asked me once, how would you feel about going? I said, I don't care. I said I could use the rest. So that lasts probably about, I don't know, that whole thing, 2+ years.
Wow.
And we go through depositions and with the lawyers and that. Jewell sues the newspaper, ends up going to the Georgia Supreme Court, and they rule in our favor, essentially, that what we reported at the time was what
was believed to be
was
fact.
believed to be fact at the time.
Yeah.
And then after that, Kathy continues to pursue the story, and I'm helping her out little by little. But turns out it's Eric Robert Rudolph who planted the bomb, and for reasons which I'm really not sure exactly.
Yeah,
why.
I'd have to admit I know of the event, but I'm pretty ignorant on the details of. Do you think that had you made that attribution, you would have had to gone through those couple of years?
No.
You think that just a couple of words could have changed that entire situation?
After I retired, I taught journalism for 6 years at the University of North Georgia, and I'd bring that case up, and I'd tell them. I tell my kids that if we had put those 5 words in there, according to law enforcement sources, that lawsuit never would have happened.
Yeah.
That they would have had no reason to sue us.
Yeah.
Because as it stood, they still didn't have a leg to stand on. But
you won. Well,
yeah.
I should say won, but obviously you didn't do jail time.
Right. Right. So. But yeah, those 5 words would have been, would have made any sort of attempt at a lawsuit moot.
Yeah, well, and I think that's actually a pretty big lesson to learn for a lot of people. In that, even in just the way I speak day to day, I try to have a certain level of ambiguity in the way that I speak. Not to purposely be vague, but just to admit, I don't know everything. I could totally be wrong. So as I understand things, this is how this, that, or the other works, but also realize we should double check these kind of things. So I think that would be important for a lot of people to learn just in general, to not necessarily speak in absolutes all the time.
Yeah, we were accused of a rush to judgment on that story, but we had the story correct as we knew it at the time and as the FBI believed it at the time.
Yeah.
And even in talking to my several sources at the FBI office here in Atlanta, and it's like, you guys had the story right. You had it right on the nose, and and Kathy had gotten her information. She is the one who got the information initially. Mm-hmm. She's the one who broke the story. I'm just the old guy who got the confirmation that she was right about the story. But the unfortunate thing about that, the way that all transpired, was that because of the accusations against her and because of her lifestyle, and the lawyers really went after her and really demeaned her character. She spiraled downhill, and she eventually died a couple of years later, drug overdose.
Oh wow, that's unfortunate.
There was an accidental drug. I mean, it was a prescription drug overdose, but I mean, I remember visiting her in the hospital, before she died, and it's like that thing. That lawsuit really got to her, really, because her whole life was the newspaper business. And she loved doing what she did, and I mean, she was a lot of fun to be around, but it was oil and water. I mean, it's more like fire, and because she would sit at her desk, and I remember. She would yell at people on the phone. It's like, she's like, "Give me something I can use in the fucking newspaper."
kind of the thing you see in the movies about the news business.
Exactly. And she was like that. You could hear her all across the newsroom. And she was quite the character, And
she was trying to make her way and make her voice in the news industry.
Yeah, I mean, and she was really good at what she did. I mean, she broke a lot of stories. She had a lot of sources with cops, and then I haven't seen the movie yet, but they did a movie about.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, Clint Eastwood did the movie. I can't remember the name of it. I think it's Richard Jewell.
Man, now that you say that, it sounds super familiar, and I can't think of it.
Yeah. But Clint Eastwood was in the movie. John Hamm played a composite of FBI characters. I can't remember the actress's name who played Kathy in the movie, but I'm in the movie briefly. And they even have my names in the movie. If you go into the the IMDb thing, you can see my name in there as being a character in this in this movie. And the thing that one of the reasons I haven't seen the movie is I read the script, and the guy who wrote the script, Billy Ray, also did Captain Phillips, which I really like. Captain Phillips. That was a great movie. But when I read this script for this movie, it's like, where did he get this crap? I mean, it's like, but he had an agenda. And it was funny because there was one point he was supposed to meet with us at the newspaper to discuss the script, and he canceled out on us. And so, this was after I think it was after I retired, and they called me and asked me to come in and look at it, and to be a part of the meeting, and then they canceled the meeting. But anyway, so it was that was a pretty tumultuous 2 or 3 years.
Well, I had no idea you were involved with all that.
Yeah.
And like I said, I wish I could remember the name of the movie, and I feel so bad because I would love to put it out there. But I know I have seen the trailers and seen stuff about it. So because it's in my memory now. But yeah, that's wild. When you say that the concerns for terrorism and such time around the world, I'm trying to remember when the World Trade Center bombings happened. Not 9/11, but the bombings in the parking garage and the basements and stuff.
Yes. Yeah.
Do you remember if that was anywhere close to the same time frame?
It was, but I can't remember if it was before or after. But I do remember those particular incidents.
Because I remember there was always the question with that too of whether, and I don't remember what all happened with it, but whether it was or at least at the time, a foreign source, potential terrorism kind of thing.
Well, I think that they eventually determined that it was, I can't remember exactly who it was, but it was foreign terrorism.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there was a particular, and I can't remember the group. I don't know if it was ISIS or one of those groups that had a cell in a mosque somewhere in Brooklyn or something like that that was responsible for it. But it was radical Islamist, essentially, that they determined who was responsible for the truck filled with explosives that they drove in there. But they traced that particular rental truck to a mosque somewhere in, I don't know, it was Brooklyn or New Jersey or something like that.
It reminded me of that in the increasing fears of terrorism at the time.
Right. Yeah, and that, I just can't remember if that was before or after. But there were a couple of incidents. I can't specifically remember exactly what they were that occurred before the Olympics that heightened the concern that there would be some sort of domestic terrorist incident at the games in Atlanta.
Was it a regular thing at the time to have like military, National Guard, and stuff to assist with security on those kind of events?
I think this was the first Summer Olympics in the United States since 1980. I'm pretty sure, and that was in Los Angeles. So, coincidentally, there was an incident at the 1980 Olympics, which kind of led people to believe Richard Jewell was responsible for this, because there was an incident where a Los Angeles cop, had planted I think it was a fake explosive device, and then had discovered the device supposedly to draw attention to himself about being the hero. And there was this profile that the FBI had developed about the hero bomber kind of thing. And that's one of the reasons, because Richard Jewell had been so prominent in saving people, getting people out of the way before the bomb exploded. So they had taken that incident from the 1980 games in Los Angeles. It's like, okay, who was closest to this? Who would get the most publicity from it? And it was Richard Jewell. And so that's one of the reasons they focused in on him.
Copycat kind of situation.
Yeah.
Wow. So where then did you go from there?
Just continued doing stories on military affairs, different that period from would have been, because I was pretty much tied up with the lawsuit and the sort of the fallout from the 96 Olympics through about 98, I think, something like that. And, those years from after the Olympics up until the World Trade Center bombings are just kind of, I don't recall a whole lot of
stuff. Quieted down a little bit.
Yeah, quieted down. I remember going down to Fort Stewart, and what was then Fort Stewart, and Fort Benning, what was then Fort Benning, to do stories on various things, training, just different aspects of military affairs. I don't remember anything specifically.
Nothing really stood out.
Yeah, nothing really stands out during that time.
So then we get to 9/11. Because I'm sure, especially being in the news business, that was a whole new world after that.
Absolutely. And I can remember I had, that morning, I had gone out for a run and had come back and was getting ready to go into the office and turned the radio on, and heard an airplane had flown into the World Trade Center. And I thought it was like, a small plane. Accident kind of thing. And then as more information comes in, I think I got a call from the office that, that you need to get in here. And so go to the office, and they started putting a team together to go to New York. All flights had been canceled, so it's like...
Let's get some rental vans and get on the road.
Yeah, and so they ended up putting a team together and going to New York. I stayed in the office as kind of coordinating some of these efforts and some of the other efforts of trying to figure out exactly what happened, who was responsible, kind of thing. And I remember one of my sons came in to help out too, and like make phone calls and just help coordinate things and that sort of thing. I remember that morning. I don't remember, and I remember working quite a bit that day. And most of what I was doing was coordination, just coordinating efforts of people, and trying to help put information together, helping editing, and just making sure that people were in the right place.
Well, that's like in talking with Thunder. When he was, because he hadn't been in the Coast Guard very long, and the difference in dynamics of your normal everyday person who 9/11 happens and the world stopped, for most people at least, because everybody's like, what is going on? What is this craziness? Planes are flying into New York and crashing into buildings, and then people like yourself or like him in the military, it's like, well, plane crashed in the building, time to go to work. It's now it's time to go. And just that big difference of, and then like you say, I've spoken to so many people, and I remember as a kid, I was in school and it happened, and the first plane hit, and you think like, oh yeah, it was an accident, whatever, and then like you're watching on TV, and the second plane comes in, and then it's like, oh damn, this is this is something different. Right. This is a big deal.
Yeah. No, I think that a lot of us were really shocked about the fact that somebody would actually fly an airplane full of passengers into a building. What level of insanity does it take to do that sort of thing?
Yeah.
It was very disturbing, but at the same time, I think that those of us who have been in the military, you can realize how bad this is, but you still have a duty to do. You can't just sit there and go, oh my God, I'm totally dumbstruck by this. It's more to the point of, okay, what do we need to do to find out how this happened, who's responsible, what do we do, kind of thing. I think there's an organizational skill that we develop in the military, and no matter what kind of job you have, that you're able to respond to these sorts of things with a lot clearer thinking than most average people have.
Yeah. Well, you were mentioning earlier when we were talking about just being in the news business and some of the being in quote real news and the immediacy and the deadlines and certain personalities, certain types of people that respond under pressure. Like we're at our best when we have too much, kind of thing. And as you said, so many people are watching this and seeing it happen, and maybe not processing immediately, but they're getting to absorb it in a different way. Whereas, obviously I was a kid at the time, but having experienced being in the military later, when stuff goes down, you have to push all that aside. Like, I'll process later. Right now, I got the job to do.
Right. Yeah. It's like preparing the folks that actually went to New York, the group that we sent up there. And it's like, I'm the one who says, okay, you're going to need some extra gas because you don't know if you're going to be able to get gas on the way up there. Mm-hmm. You're going to need some non-perishable food to take along. You're going to need some blankets and or sleeping bags to take along in case you can't find hotel rooms up there. You're going to need plenty of water to take with you. Don't worry about taking clothes or anything like that. So I'm more of an organizational person like that, and that was kind of my role whenever we did any of these kind of assignments. It's like making sure that we're organized before we go, so we're not dependent on other people or other things, or just assuming that these things are going to be available when we get there.
Yeah, I kind of compare that to going overseas, and a lot of people just trying to take a lot of weird stuff over there. Like guys trying to take Xboxes with them over. It's like, dude, we're going to the desert. Like, for all your colognes and stuff. Yeah. Like, I know those little creature comforts are nice, but it just resolve your stuff. We're all going to be dirty. We're all going to be stinky. Like, we need water and we need food. And a place to sleep that's not on a rock would be great. the other stuff, like, those other little niceties, we can figure that out later.
Yeah. Well, I was helped a great deal by that, not only by my experience in the military, but some of these assignments that I did overseas. I had a good friend, Lloyd Burchett, who had been a mercenary, and he'd been in Rhodesia. He was a two-tour veteran of Vietnam. Had worked with the Army Security Agency, with the Marines up in I Corps and that. And actually, he had contacted me after my first trip to Central America, after I'd gone down there that time. And it was funny. He was a voice on the telephone for about 6 months, where he called me up and he said, "Well, you got this right, but you need to look into this and that." And so we finally met after about 6 months of talking on the telephone. But he was very organizationally minded, and a lot of times we'd discuss these things. We'd get together. Okay, if this happened, what would you need?
Yeah.
And so he would help outfit me for various trips and stuff. Like we'd go to a store. There used to be a store here called Brigade Quartermasters, which had all kinds of military gear and outdoors gear, survival gear, and that sort of thing. And we'd go, and he'd help outfit me. As a matter of fact, I still have some of the stuff. You had mentioned earlier about things that happened after the Olympics and between 9/11. And there's one thing I forgot, and this was kind of interesting. And I guess it was 1998. I don't know why this slipped my mind. But when U.S. military decided to go into Bosnia,
Okay.
to help out there, I had told my bosses, I said, I think this is something that we ought to cover, and I managed to talk them into that. And so I knew the unit was going from Germany, and they were going to go by train from Germany down to Croatia, Bosnia, in that area, because this was during a time when the Bosnians and the Serbs were fighting. Talked my way into going over there. It's like, well, they were doing embeds like they had done during the war, but it's like, you can come to Germany and you can take your chances, but we can't guarantee you a spot, and you may be able to follow us down and that kind of stuff. And so I talked to Lloyd, and I got together, and he's like, well, you might want to just go over there on your own and see what you can do. And so that's what I did. I went over there, and there was I had a contact, and I can't remember now exactly who it was, but anyway, I flew over there with just this one contact. And what I ended up doing was I went to Croatia and Bosnia, and I was ahead of the troops, the U.S. troops, as they were coming in. Every time that they showed up, I had been there beforehand. And there's another one of these bizarre things that I went to. I flew into Hungary first, and the troops were initially coming into Hungary, and flew in there, middle of a snowstorm, rented a car, and driving down to this one area where I was told that the troops were going to come. I got a hotel down there, and then I'm driving. The next day, I've got to drive to another little village where supposedly the U.S. troops are coming in. And I'm driving around trying to see if I can find any sign of them. And I see a Humvee down the street down here. So I pull up, get out and walk into this deserted building, and there are two guys in there, and U.S. military guys, and start talking to them. And it just so happens that one of the guys is a University of Georgia graduate who knows
Really?
the Journal-Constitution,
Wow.
my newspaper. He's like, yeah, the troops are coming in here, and if you stay here or you go here, and so he gives me all the information. I mean, it's one of those
Serendipitous,
very
meant to be.
Yeah, it's like magic.
No.
So I end up reporting on that, and then I do some extra reporting also, where I've got a driver that he's supposedly a driver. He can't drive a stick shift, and I've got a stick shift, but he insists on driving because I hired him as my driver. And he speaks the local language, and anyway, we drive through parts of Croatia and parts of Bosnia that have been badly bombed, and he gets us through the roadblocks and that sort of thing.
Grinding gears the whole time.
And then we get to one point, and this is like late at night, and we're driving down this very narrow country road, and on both sides of the road there's barbed wire and signs that say mines.
Yeah.
On both sides of the road. And
exactly the place you want to be.
Yeah, and he's like, we need to turn around. And the guy's his name was Dubrovko, and he goes, but he went by Dudo. I said, Dudo, you cannot turn around here. There's no way. You're going to end up in a minefield. I said, just keep going straight ahead. Because there are no mines on this road the way it looks. They're on both sides of the road.
Yeah.
And so it took forever to convince him to just keep going straight. Do not try to turn around, because you're going to get us blown up. So,
wait till you find a clearing where we can.
Yeah. So anyway, I mean, there were several instances like that. There were mines all over the place over there. And there was one time we were driving, and I can't remember, somebody else was driving, and I was with a group of people, and I was kind of snoozing in the back seat. And he takes the wrong turn, because I know exactly where we're going, and this is in the dark. And so he takes the wrong, and I'm like, where are you? What are you doing? And he's like, we're going here. I said, no, you took the wrong turn. You need to turn around and go back. And so that was one of the more interesting experiences too, just because of the fact that I was able to get in ahead of the U.S. troops just because I used my own initiative.
Yeah.
And there were certain things that happened just because they were probably meant to happen. So I was able to report on that whole mess over there. And so that took up, I don't know, several months. And I guess it was 98 that I did that, the winter of 98.
It's kind of funny to think. I mean, like, you're just one guy, and obviously it's easier to move one guy. But to think that you would show up before the military, yeah, your advanced party kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, and again, it was pure luck. Well, I say luck. I mean, maybe it was just kind of instinct also that led me in the right direction. And I was usually in contact with my buddy Lloyd also. It's like, where he'd be monitoring the news, and this is happening, that's happening, and I didn't always have access to the computer or news or anything like that.
Yeah.
So it was always, but I seemed to be, in that particular instance, in the right place at the right time.
How's that phrase go? Was it luck as a combination of, was it opportunity and something? I can't remember what it is. But just your intuition, you're like, I know something's going to be there. That's where I need to be. And then you were right about it, which is pretty cool. That's wild. So how long after 9/11 and such was it before you started going over into the war zones again?
It was pretty soon, actually. I mean, one of the things that I helped do before that all happened was that after 9/11, we sort of, it's like we mobilized a bunch of people at the newspaper that were going to cover various aspects of the war. Mm-hmm. And I remember we got a guy in from Forces Command, a colonel that I knew, to sort of like give them, all the other people who were going to do this, sort of a briefing on, you need to be aware of this, you need to be aware of that, kind of thing. And then so I help facilitate that and help facilitate people getting ready to go to various places to do this, that, and the other. I mean, I was kind of the organizer for a while there.
Yeah.
Can we take another break here before
of
we
course.
get into...
Yeah, no.